looked at steps 1 to 3, and I told you in the end of the last video that in our balances in our T accounts or our ledger, we must have debit balances equal to credits. But when we have all of these T accounts, and you could have several of them, so companies have 20, 30, 40 accounts, it's hard to just look at them and know whether your debits equal your credits or to quickly figure out the balances of all of the accounts. So for that, we're going to use these balances and we're going to create a trial balance, which is how we check that our records, our debits equal our credits. So the trial balance is a list of all of the accounts and their balances at a specific point in time. And as I said, it summarizes the ending balances in the ledger. So we'll look at all of the different balances in our ledger accounts and we'll bring them into one place. So we'll list them all as our trial balance. Now these get ordered as follows. So your asset accounts will always go first. That'll be followed by the liabilities second, equity third, revenues fourth, and finally your expenses go fifth. And we won't really use them in our course, but again, in the real world, you actually give each account an account number, and it matches up with the order that they go in. So assets, for example, would get an account number that's in the thousands typically. So maybe 1010. That would be the account number for cash. So it would be shown that way. Liabilities, since they go second, they would get a 2000. So for example, if we've got accounts payable, it could be account number 2100. So liabilities get those 2000s. Equity would be a 3000 number, revenues of 4000, expenses of 5000. Again, we won't really use those. You'll just have to remember to use this order on the trial balances, but in the real world, you often see the account number. And the real reason that you see that is typically you're doing this through an accounting system. And it's much easier to just type in a 4-digit number, like 1010, than typing a word. So yes, cash is pretty quick, but it's easier to type 2100 than type accounts payable. So it's just a quick way to reference that account without actually typing the words out. Okay, so that's how we order the accounts. And then from that, once we've got our trial balance, we will use those to create the financial statements. Think back to last week when we were doing terrible toy makers, that example, or other examples that you would have seen in my lab or as you were practicing. They often gave you that list of accounts. It just didn't specifically tell you it was a trial balance, but you needed that list of accounts in order to create the financial statements. And again, one of the reasons we're doing the trial balance is to check that the sum of our debit accounts equals the sum of our credit accounts. And it just notes here not to confuse trial balance with balance sheet. So remember, the balance sheet was that financial statement where we had our assets equal to our liabilities plus shareholders' equity, whereas the trial balance is the list of all our accounts. So just be careful to keep those separate. Okay, so let's look at our example into step 4. So we want to go through the T accounts that we created in step 3, and we're going to list those here. So I'll quickly flip back. Oops. So here we've got the truck account, and our ending balance is 30,000 as a debit. The bank loan, we have 43,000 as a credit. We had a $5,500 debit in cash and a $7,500 debit in inventory. So now we will summarize those into a trial balance. And it's called unadjusted specifically because in step 5, we'll make adjustments and then later create an adjusted trial balance. So how you create that trial balance, just finding the GL balances or the ledger ending balances, that's the same. Just the step in the process depends what you label that balance. So trial balances are kind of like a financial statement. They're not included in there, but it's the same idea. So when you prepare these, you would give it a name, just like you did the financial statement. So you'd put the name of the company. You'd note that this is an unadjusted trial balance, and we put the date, just like we did with the financial statements. So this is at September 10th, 2020, because we posted all of our transactions up to that date. And then you just go through and you list the accounts and their balances. And like we've always done, we'll split our debits and our credits. So if you guys flip back to your example, the first account we had was cash, and it was a debit balance of $5,500. And again, we're ordering these assets first, liability second, then equity, revenue, expenses, which we won't have in this example, but cash there. The next we had was our inventory, $7,500. We had truck, $30,000. And lastly, we had the bank loan payable. Which was $43,000, but remember this was a credit. So we need to put it on the right side. And because we are always checking if our debits equal our credits, you always also will have a total on your balance or on your trial balance. So figure out your total debits and your total credits. Credits is pretty easy. We don't need to do any math. If we add up our debits, thankfully we get $43,000. So we get our check mark. Our debits equal our credits. So that's a really short example, but it flows through all of the steps from steps 1 to 4 and takes a look at how those get us to this unadjusted trial balance. Now here's a good example, a more full example from the textbook. And again, you can see there's the account numbers here, as I mentioned. The asset accounts are in the 1000s and they come first. And assets have a normal balance of a debit that you can see here. So it makes sense those are all debits. Next we have our liabilities, which are 2000 accounts, the number 2000. And we have a credit balance, which is normal for those type of accounts. Third, we have our equity. So those are labeled as the 3000s. But remember, equity, you have to think of withdrawals and owner's capital. So the normal balance for withdrawal is a debit, whereas the normal balance for investments or the owner's capital account is a credit. We've got our revenue, 4,000 credit, and our expenses lastly are those 5,000s, and they are debits. And again, to check, our debits equal our credits. So what happens if you get through all 4 steps and your trial balance doesn't balance? So your debits don't equal your credits. Well, there's a few things that could have gone wrong. And if you check out page 77 and 78, so mark that down for when you're doing practice questions or assignments, just in case you get here and you don't balance. And it gives you tips of how you can find the errors that you've made. So for example, Maybe when you were creating your trial balance, you just missed picking up an account. So say you forgot the office supplies account. Well, you wouldn't balance here. So you first want to figure out what is your difference between your debits and credits, and that could be your first check. Go see if you missed an account from your ledgers or your T accounts for that amount. If that didn't work, it's possible you could have missed posting a journal entry into your ledgers. So again, you could go look through your journal entries and see if you're out, or if there's an amount in the journal entry for that you're out. So maybe you missed posting a debit to office supplies, and that's why you're out that amount. So take a look at the textbook. As I said, it goes through, gives you some hints if you find that you get to an error. So that's all we're going to cover in this chapter for lecture-wise, but the next few videos that I'm going to post, I'll give you some questions that I want you guys to practice, and then I'll go through and make some videos of those solutions, so walking you through those. I really do suggest try practicing the questions without the video, but there's going to be some terminology in those questions that maybe is pretty new. So if you need to go through the first one as I go through the solution, okay, but then the next ones after that, I really would like if you guys practice them on your own, see what you get, and then go through the solution. And it's just a good way to test your understanding.